Gearbox is not allowing discount codes on the Pro Ultimates yet, but by purchasing yours through the link in the description, I do receive a bit of a kickback, and those proceeds go a long, long way to helping me improve the channel. As we gear up for the launch of the Gearbox Ultimate series, there's probably a lot of questions running through your head. Why does it look almost exactly the same? What is the difference between it and the other Pro models anyways? Is it going to be banned? How's it going, y'all? I'm Rafa the Pickleball Tech Dude. I'm an ex-PPA employee, a Harvard-educated engineer, and a seasoned pickleball product tester. And let's just keep it real. You have a lot of questions, and I have solid answers. So keeping that in mind, let's talk about the new Gearbox Ultimate Elongated. Most of you will be familiar with Gearbox's previous Pro Series drops, the Power and Control paddles. There were actually a deceiving number of changes that went into making this paddle, but for the sake of you guys making a quick and very informed decision about whether or not it's for you, I'm going to be simplifying my thoughts through a comparison of this paddle to the current Pro paddles on the market, the Pro Power and the Pro Control, from both a structural and gameplay perspective, and then I'm going to answer some of the more frequent questions that you guys are probably going to have about this paddle. I want to note firstly that the Pro Ultimate, at least for the first drop happening on July 30th, is only going to be available in the elongated shape, and therefore all the comparisons I make in this video are going to be to the Pro Power elongated and the Pro Control elongated paddles. All three of the Pro elongated paddles have practically the same static weight, the exact same elongated shape and dimensions therein, the exact same grip length and circumference, which I've always found to be very thin and I've come to dislike quite a bit, and the exact same balance point, which leans very head heavy and contributes a little bit to the power you see in all three of the paddles. In fact, the only two visible differences from the Ultimate to the other two Pro paddles are the new teal colorway and the slight increase in the physical thickness of the paddle by a couple of millimeters. So knowing all of that, it can be very easy to fall into the trap of thinking that the Ultimate will play very similar, if not identical, to the other Pro paddles with some slight changes due to the increase in core thickness. But when I got onto the court, it became very apparent that there were some bigger factors at play because the gameplay experience was night and day. There's four key characteristics that differentiate the Ultimate from the other two Pro paddles in my eyes. And first and foremost is that this paddle does feel much heavier to swing than the other two. Paddles with swing weights of around 120 to 130 tend to feel heavier than the average paddle to swing through the air. But while the Pro Control Elongated and Pro Power Elongated managed to keep their swing weights around 120, barely straying into that category, the Pro Ultimate Elongated has cemented itself firmly into the heavy-feeling swing category with a swing weight of 124. Now this might feel good for people that are looking for some more plow through the ball or are really looking to anchor down heavy on resets, but it definitely comes at a detriment to your hand speed. Second most important characteristic to me is that the power on the Pro Ultimate has been toned down significantly from the Pro Power and Pro Control paddles, but don't let that put your guard down. During my testing, I was able to achieve ball speeds on average of about 55.8 miles per hour with the Pro Ultimate. That's about 1.5 miles per hour down from even the Pro Control, which might not seem like a lot, but when we're talking about a distance of about 40 feet of measurement, that difference becomes very noticeable. Anyone who's felt like the Pro Power Elongateds were a little too poppy and too powerful for them to handle are going to feel very comfortable switching to a paddle like the Pro Ultimate, as you're going to be able to keep a significantly large number of balls in the court. To keep things in perspective, however, the Pro Ultimate is still in the very highest echelon of power achieving paddles on the market right now. If you're familiar with the new Christian Alshon Signature Paddletech Bantam 12.7mm paddles, you'll know that those paddles can absolutely spank the ball. And yet, I was still able to achieve power levels at an average of 2 miles per hour higher with the Pro Ultimate than those paddles. All that to say that while the Pro Ultimate is not the rocket launcher that the Pro Power Elongated is, it still hits Mach 11 bullets. So now you might be asking yourself, if the paddle hits so hard, then how are you able to keep a lot more balls in as I claim? And that has to do with the third most important characteristic I want to point out, which is the increase in spin. Due primarily to Gearbox's continued use of unidirectional carbon fiber layers in the face, and also the increase in core size, Gearbox has been able to achieve a dwell time much higher than that of their other Pro paddles, resulting in much higher spin results in my testing. The feeling of the ball sinking into the face feels much more apparent on the Pro Ultimate than the Pro Power and Pro Control paddles, which I quite enjoy. And by achieving higher spin numbers through more dwell time as opposed to just adding more grit, I feel like you're a lot more likely to see your balls have dip and more shape than you would otherwise. And that brings me to the fourth and, in my opinion, most apparent difference in the Pro Ultimate in comparison to the other Pro paddles, and that is that the sweet spot is significantly bigger. To be fully transparent, one of my least favorite power paddles on the market produced last year was the Pro Power Elongated, for the primary reason that the sweet spot felt like it was a small rectangle kind of in the upper third of the paddle. So it felt like if you hit the ball in the middle of the paddle face, where it feels natural to hit it on most other paddles, you are going to produce a miss hit or have a sort of shocking ball feeling that I wasn't accustomed to. But what I've experienced with the Pro Ultimate, especially if you're comparing it to the Power and Control variants, is a sweet spot that is not only much bigger than both of those paddles, but is competitive with some of the best paddles on the market. Don't get me wrong, Gearbox's intention with the Ultimate was to produce a sweet spot that was nearly wall-to-wall on the paddle in both directions, and I don't think they've really achieved that. I think there's a good at least half an inch of room around the edge where you're easily going to produce mishits with the paddle, and then you're very prone to mishits, especially on the bottom towards the throat. The Ultimate could definitely benefit from some weight around the throat area in order to reduce those mishits. But overall, the balls off the face of the Ultimate felt a little bit more predictable and way more controllable than they ever have before on the other Pro variants. So I think there's a bit of a combination play going on here with that tone down in power and that increase in sweet spot size and dwell time. The Ultimate just feels very controllable despite still being one of the hottest paddles on the market. And so at this point, if you're unfamiliar with Gearbox's work, you might be wondering, how is Gearbox even able to achieve these unique characteristics when no other power paddle could? And the answer to that, excitedly for me, is the technology. I've spoken directly with the CEO of Gearbox at length to understand technologically what's going on with this paddle, and I'm going to use that knowledge in order to answer some of the very pressing questions you likely have about it. No, these Pro Ultimate paddles will not be banned. And in fact, Gearbox owners with the Pro Power or Pro Control paddles will be happy to hear that their paddles will also not be in danger of being banned for the exact same reasons. And those reasons are twofold. Firstly, Gearbox does not achieve their high spin levels through grit, they achieve it through increased dwell time. So having illegal grit right now is not an issue for Gearbox. And second, and more importantly, when it comes to the PB coefficient of restitution or PB core test, essentially a deflection test measuring ball velocity coming off the face of a paddle, the Pro Ultimate and all Pro variants of these paddles pass that test with flying colors. I've learned exactly how USAP runs their PB core test, and I've also seen some PB core values, not just for Gearbox, but for other company paddles that I can't actually share with you guys. But again, from what I have seen, what I can say is that Gearbox paddles are in no danger of failing that test. In fact, there are some currently widely accepted paddles that weren't even on my radar that are more in danger of failing that test than these Gearbox paddles. Again, without knowing exactly what I can and can't share with you guys in regards to how that core test is run at USAP, the best theory I have as to how the Gearbox paddles are passing that test so efficiently while still producing crazy amounts of power is that the way that power is achieved by using the paddle in an actual game scenario is different than how USAP is attempting to gauge power in the testing environment. I'll learn more about what I can share with you guys about that test in the coming weeks, but the key takeaway for now is that I can say with a very high degree of certainty that with the current way USAP is running their core test, and with the numerical value limits they're attempting to place on paddles through that test, Gearbox is in zero danger of being banned. I'm going to kill two birds with one stone here while I talk about the inside construction of the paddle and why it plays the way it does. This is probably the most detailed and scientific I'm going to get in the video, so if you just really don't care about how the paddle gets to play the way it does, or about any of these sort of technical specs on the inside, or you've already made a decision about this paddle, I would just skip this section and go to my outro. Now for the rest of you, let's talk about why I didn't talk about twist weight at all in my standout characteristics, and what exactly is going on inside the Gearbox Pro Ultimate. The twist weight value on the Gearbox Pro Ultimate came in at about 5.6, which is pretty bad. As a matter of fact, across the entire Pro lineup, all of their twist weights have been sub 6 and quite bad. And the most baffling thing about these paddles, in particular the Pro Ultimate, is that while twist weight is a measurement of stability on off-center shots, and like I said, it is bad in terms of numerical value on all of these paddles, the Pro Ultimate in particular felt extremely stable. And it all comes down to Gearbox's internal structure. See, most paddles, in particular Gen 2 paddles that are foam injected around the edges, tend to use something called EVA foam. And EVA foam is most helpful for muting ball feel and for dampening the vibrations from ball impact, which gives you that bigger sweet spot perceived on a Gen 2 paddle compared to a Gen 1. EVA foam comes in a variety of different densities, but essentially the more dense and firm that EVA foam is, the better it is at achieving those target characteristics. But the rate limiting factor, aka why companies can't just put the most dense form of EVA foam in the paddles, is that by increasing that density, you significantly increase the overall weight of the paddle. So while companies could technically use the most dense form of EVA foam to achieve the characteristics on their paddle, I'm sure they'd rather not have their paddle have their static weight be 8.6, 8.7 ounces or higher. And so there's 4 key ways that I know of that Gearbox has increased the size of their sweet spot and increased the perceived stability of their paddle. And one of those ways is an ingenious way to get around this increase in density, leading to increase in static weight in the paddle. If you were to cut open a Gearbox Pro Ultimate horizontally through the face, this is roughly the internal structure you would see. You see the bars of carbon fiber that comprise the core in the center that are both filled with and slightly surrounded by EVA foam with this sort of white yellowish tinge, and then a much darker black foam that surrounds the entire structure and goes all the way out towards the walls. Before I explain that internal structure, the first factor that I know of that Gearbox is using to increase the size of that sweet spot and increase the perceived twist weight is that they're literally using stiffer carbon fibers in the face layers on the outer parts of the paddle than they are in the center. This is an interesting and kind of funny way that Gearbox is able to achieve these sort of characteristics, because you're giving players a different ball feel experience on the outer parts of the paddle that mimic what you have towards the center in the actual sweet spot. And so this is doing exactly that. The outer layers are simply mimicking the same ball feel and sound that you would get on the sweet spot on even the Pro Power paddles, except it's going across the entire paddle face. So while your sweet spot and twist weight is not actually increasing, it will feel that way when you hit the ball. The fact that they figured that out alone is wild to me, but we'll move on. The next 2 factors don't require too much explanation, but essentially Gearbox has found a way that they increase the weight of the carbon fiber itself in the core as you move further out from the center and more towards the perimeter. So it functions exactly the way that weighting the edges of the paddle works to increase the size of the sweet spot, but they've done it from the inside. And then somewhat related to that, also with the core structure, they've changed the direction of the fibers towards the edges of the core so that it flexes innately different in the Ultimates than it has in the previous models and makes for a more improved ball feel experience. That's probably as deep as I need to go there, because I know this video is getting long, but we've just gotten to the coolest part, so bear with me one more second. So we've just talked about how Gearbox engages their core much more in the Pro Ultimate in order to flex and expand and bend in different ways. I've also talked about how EVA foam can't be made too dense despite wanting to achieve certain characteristics because of its inherent weight with increased density. And EVA foam is that black foam that you see outlining on the edges. And I've neglected talking about the foam on the inside of the core and directly outlining it very thinly up until this moment very intentionally. What Gearbox did here that has absolutely blown my mind is they've gone, hey, if we can't put super dense EVA foam because it's too heavy, why don't we find a way to put pressure and squeeze that EVA foam into a more dense form over time? And so that yellowish foam that is on the inside of the core and thinly outlining it is actually an expansive foam that starts off at about 1 millimeter lining on either side of the core and can expand to about 40 to 50 times its size. And so essentially what's happening here is that over time, this break-in period that people talk about when it comes to Gearbox paddles and will continue to be a topic of conversation when it comes to these Pro Ultimate paddles is really just the expansion of that expanding foam over time, increasing the density of the EVA foam on the edges and allowing the sweet spot to feel even larger as you continue to play with the paddle over time. They literally pressurize the entire internal structure, which is what causes the foam to fill up the spaces inside the core and allows the foam outside the core to expand outward into the EVA foam, making it more dense as opposed to collapsing inward onto the ribbed structure of the core. This is absolutely insane engineering and R&D on Gearbox's behalf. And it really pokes a hole in the idea that twist weight equals stability and higher twist weight means bigger sweet spot. It's just really not that simple. Those are simple untruths that every paddle reviewer, including myself, has been guilty of peddling at one point in our career. And it's ingenuity like this from paddle companies that's really pushing us to find new metrics that are more accurately describing the characteristics of the paddles we review. Wow. And finally, with that, you have pretty much everything that you need to know about the Gearbox Pro Ultimates if you're thinking about going and getting them soon. I might have an even more in-depth look coming soon as I'm in close contact with Gearbox's CEO and I really want to get him in for a video on the channel. So I'll let you guys know if that comes to fruition sometime in the next couple of weeks. If you made it here to the end of the video, thank you so much for watching and for nerding out with me. Remember to like and subscribe for more content like this and more reviews to come. And remember, the link in the description to buy the Gearbox Pro Ultimate does not actually apply a discount code as they're not giving those out at this time, but the proceeds do give me a bit of a kickback and it does go directly to improving my content on this channel. And with that, I hope you guys stay happy and healthy until the next one. Peace.